All right, welcome back to the channel. So Errol Spence Jr. is still on the path trying to get a fight with Canelo Alvarez, and he says that it is the biggest fight in boxing, so let's make it happen. But as usual, there are the protectors out there that for some reason don't want to see big fights and got a lot of excuses about why we shouldn't get them. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back, welcome back. So we are going to talk about Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo Alvarez, two guys who are pretty much on everybody's top 10 pound for pound list. That is, sorry, Canelo Alvarez fans, on everybody's pound for pound list that excuse somebody that is tested positive for performance enhancing drugs. I think Canelo Alvarez is probably the best fighter in the world. And if it was not for him testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs, I would definitely have him as my number one pound-for-pound guy. It's just that I'm on a bit of a crusade to try to get rid of all the cheating in boxing to the extent that I can. So, or at least the extent that I can recognize it and try to get rid of it, right? And, you know, steroids is just something that is so widely abused in boxing that when it happens to somebody, I'm sorry, I have to doubt you moving forward. But that's not saying that I don't think Canelo Alvarez in his own right is an excellent fighter, because the dude is an excellent fighter. And honestly, one of my top 3 or 4 fighters to watch, period. Deontay Wilder, Gary Russell Jr., Errol Spence Jr., and Canelo Alvarez are my favorite fighters to watch fight who are champions right now. You could throw Jaron Ennis in there as somebody that's coming up, and, you know, guys like Chris Colbert, you know, Jared Anderson, guys like that. There's a lot of other good fighters, and I don't want to shortchange anybody, but Canelo Alvarez is definitely way up there, man, because the guy's skill set is just off the planet. But because of that, and I know everybody acknowledges, Canelo Alvarez makes big fights, right? He's a big fighter. Like, I have no issue whatsoever telling people that Canelo Alvarez is one of the biggest stars in boxing. And I have a suspicion that when he gets away from the zone, that he can make the biggest fights in boxing. But that would cause you to ask the question, who exactly do you think is the biggest fights for Errol Spence Jr. to make? For Canelo Alvarez to make. And that is pretty clear. You have guys that are in the weight classes around him. You have guys like at 168 pounds, really there is no tremendously big fight for him at 168 pounds because there's no real big name fighter at 168 pounds. But at 160 pounds, there's Jamal Charlo. And if at 100, the biggest fight that he could have is against the guy that is the biggest seller, that is the closest to his weight class. And without a doubt, that is Errol Spence Jr. Those guys are the 2 of the biggest stars in boxing. Like, when Canelo Alvarez, a fight was announced, or when the tickets went on sale for Canelo Alvarez versus Billy Joe Saunders, there was a lot of talk about how Canelo Alvarez broke I think it was a pre-sale record. That's what they referred to. And for the sake of this video, I'm not going to bemoan that, because really that's just somebody with a lot of money, you know, paying for the fight that really wants to see the fight. So, you know, they pay a lump sum for the bulk of the tickets and they sell the tickets or whatever, however they do it. But they talk about the pre-sale records, whether it was a pre-sale or not a pre-sale. You know, obviously there's a lot of money being put in the gate. So who else is similar to him? Errol Spence Jr. It's almost identical because he has the same earning capacity at Texas Stadium, the AT&T Stadium that Canelo Alvarez has. There's no doubt that Errol Spence Jr.'s next major fight that he has at AT&T Stadium is going to sell out AT&T Stadium. The guy is an absolute huge star in Texas. Number one, he's from Dallas, and also he's just a big name in boxing all around because the guy has had excellent fights. And you have a guy that's at 147, who's basically, both these guys' careers started at 154. One guy moved to 147, and the other guy moved to 160 and then 168. But Canelo's not a big 168. He's a little 168. He's not, and so was Billy Joe Saunders. Billy Joe Saunders isn't really a 168 pounder, right? But if you look at Canelo when he fought guys that were really that size, the Kovalevs and the even though he's terrible, garbage. It's Callum Smith. Sorry, man. Callum Smith is garbage. But Callum Smith, you could see the size difference between he and those guys. So Canelo Alvarez, who pretty much is the same height and the same length as Errol Spence Jr., but just has more muscle mass, Errol Spence Jr. could go up to 160 and fight at 160 easy. He may be able to do a catch weight between 160 and 168, but Canelo can make 160. I have no doubt about that. So, and they're the same age. The style matchup works perfectly. So why wouldn't people want to see this? Obviously, this is one of the biggest fights in boxing. Even if you believe, right, go with this story that Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua is a huge fight in boxing. It's not huge because the people are paying for the people that are paying for tickets. It's not. It's big. It may be big if they go over there to Saudi Arabia and you have some very, very wealthy individuals that say, hey, let me go in my pocket and give you a bunch of money for a fight that I know I'm going to take a loss on, I guess for, I don't like to cuss in my videos, but just for shits and giggles, I guess they could do that. But honestly, I'm doubting that that's going to happen. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, the idea that it's not one of the biggest fights in boxing between Errol Spence and Canelo Alvarez is just ridiculous, because there's only fights people would say are bigger is Errol Spence Terrence Crawford, Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua Tyson Fury, maybe Deontay Wilder Anthony Joshua, but then Canelo and Errol Spence Jr. because Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo, I think, is bigger than all of those. Because you have many people would say that Canelo was bigger than Deontay Wilder, that Canelo was as a bigger name than Anthony Joshua. Definitely in the United States, he's a bigger name than Anthony Joshua. So if he's the biggest name in boxing, then Errol Spence Jr. is one of the 5 top money guys in boxing for sure. Top 6 money guys in boxing. So number 1 guy, number 6 guy, that is an absolutely huge fight. And if you look at it from the fight standpoint of it, Errol Spence Jr. is wanting the fight. The guy is a very live underdog. I can understand why people would say Errol Spence Jr. would be going in there as an underdog because of the size, the experience, or what have you of Canelo Alvarez. And I might even grant you that Canelo Alvarez would be the odds-on favorite to beat Errol Spence Jr. But that does not mean that Errol Spence Jr. and Canelo Alvarez is not going to be a very good fight, and that there's not a very good chance that Canelo Alvarez may lose to Errol Spence. Dude, if you look at Errol Spence Jr.'s style, Errol Spence is not somebody that you're going to be able to plod down in pot shot, man. It's just not going to happen. And the only question for me about Errol Spence in that situation is whether or not Errol Spence Jr. is going to be able to carry his speed up when he grows, and see how well he fills out at 140, 154, and at 160. But I absolutely don't see any reason to see why these fights, the fights couldn't happen. And again, it is a very competitive fight for styles, skills. The fact that Canelo Alvarez looks like he may be on his way down a little bit, I think we should make the fight. I absolutely agree 100% with Errol Spence Jr. and hope that something that happens after Errol Spence Jr. clears out 147 pounds, and preferably after Canelo Alvarez fights at least Jermall Charlo, but hopefully if he beats Jermall Charlo or Demetrius Andrade, which are very, very good competitive fights and could actually serve to prove that Canelo Alvarez is the best in the world, right? But he's not going to prove that he's the best in the world based on past accolades and fighting guys like Billy Joe Saunders, Callum Smith, and Rocky Fielding. But that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.